Now, let's turn to that China summit because it was billed as the superpower summit, but now President Trump is on his way back to the US after that two-day state visit to China and those talks with President Xi. He was seen off by government officials and school children waving flags. The two sides have given differing accounts of what was discussed during lengthy meetings yesterday. Well, this was President Trump talking on Air Force One about trade, the jailed pro-democracy activist Jimmy Lai, the war with Iran, Keir Starmer's political difficulties, and Taiwan.
On Taiwan, he does not want to see a fight for independence because that would be a very strong confrontation. And I heard him out.
Would the US defend Taiwan if it came to it?
I don't want to say that. I'm not going to say that. There's only one person that knows that. You know who it is? Me. I'm the only person. That question was asked to me today by President Xi. I said, I don't talk about those.
He asked you today.
He asked you if you would send troops, if you would. He asked me if I defend them. I said, I don't talk about that. On Iran, it's very interesting. He feels strongly they can't have a nuclear weapon. He said that very strongly. They cannot have a nuclear weapon, and he wants them to open up the strait.
Do you agree with President Xi to extend that year-long truce on tariffs?
We didn't discuss tariffs. I mean, they're paying tariffs. They're paying substantial tariffs, but we didn't discuss it.
Bring up with President Xi any of the political prisoners in China? Are any going to be released? Any progress?
I think he's giving very serious consideration to the pastor. The pastor is said he's giving very serious consideration to that.
What about Jimmy Lai?
I discussed it.
What about Jimmy Lai?
It's a tougher one. I did bring it up. It's a tougher one. For him, it's a tougher one.
Do you think Starmer's going to survive as Prime Minister?
It's a tough thing, unless he could straighten out immigration where he's weak. And if he doesn't start drilling, stop with the windmills all over the place that are causing havoc. They're causing havoc.
Should he quit?
I don't say that. I think he's a nice man, actually. But, I mean, I didn't like when he said, we're going to send ships as soon as you're finished with the war, as soon as you're... Well, we're sort of finished militarily, pretty much.
Well, that was Donald Trump talking to reporters on Air Force One. We'll play you more of those comments because, of course, he ranged across so many different areas a little later in the programme. Let's speak now, though, to Jonathan Zinn from the Brookings Institution, who's previously served as Director for China on the US National Security Council. Thank you, Jonathan, so much for being here with us. His usual rhetoric is to talk everything up. This has been a great success. When you look at things, what is your assessment?
Yeah, I mean, my assessment is that there was actually very little coming out of this summit, right? And my bumper sticker for this summit is that there was no escalation, which would have been bad, but there were also no concessions, I think, really from either side. There were some modest concessions on the Chinese side, primarily on the trade front, it looks like. Those haven't necessarily been confirmed from the Chinese. But I think what we've got is, you know, people have been describing this as stability. I think that's a misnomer. This is really a stalemate. Right. I think the administration and the Chinese side both kind of got stuck last year in the aftermath of the trade war. And I think that this perpetuates that. On trade, there were quotes about equality and respect, and I suspect that references tariffs. On Taiwan, it was described as the question that was the most important issue in China-US relations, with President Xi warning that during the talks on state media that if it's mishandled, the two nations could collide or even come into conflict. So big issues unresolved. Yes, that's right. But I think there was also very little movement one way or the other on the Taiwan issue. Like, I know in the run-up to this meeting, I was getting a lot of questions about whether or not there would be some kind of concession on U.S. declaratory policy on Taiwan, which could have had an outsized effect in the region. And we don't know what was said behind closed doors, but as far as we can see from the public readout and from President Trump's own comments, there seems to be, you know, consistency on the on U.S. policy. And I think from the Chinese side, it's not surprising that they raised this as a major issue, especially with Xi Jinping having Donald Trump on his home turf. Right? This is a very important issue for them. And I think what they were really looking for is to prevent another major Taiwan arms sale package being announced in the wake of this meeting. That happened after the two leaders met in Busan in South Korea last year, and the Chinese were very unhappy about that. Yes. And they worried that another arms sale like that happening in the wake of this meeting could be very embarrassing to President Xi.
I've got less than a minute left, but I mentioned your expertise introducing you. What did you make of the expertise, the China expertise, among the delegation the US sent?
It was lacking, in all honesty. I mean, it was very striking looking at the composition of the delegation. It was really business leaders, a gaggle of senior U.S. officials who have been deeply involved in dealing with the Chinese throughout this administration, but not a lot of China expertise actually physically present in the room. So that was quite striking, a departure from past precedent.
And in a sentence, does that explain why perhaps there was, in your view, very little progress?
I think in this environment, I think actually the China experts would have counseled a lack of progress, right? I think people were worried about this meeting either going poorly or going too well potentially, right? Where the administration would make some kind of meaningful concessions or gestures to Taiwan, and I don't think that happened. And I think you saw that in the comments from people like Secretary Rubio, where they articulated continuity on U.S. foreign policy.
Jonathan, we have to leave it there, but pleasure to have you on the programme. Thanks for your time.